Greetings, comrades, and welcome to the show. This is your Civic Duty, a discussion-focused show where we tackle issues relevant to politics and social problems today. I'm your host, Shant, and with me today I have some wonderful guests. We have Elena, John, and Dina. So next one, we got pretentious diction. This is a little easier to understand, I guess, just from the phrasing of it. So it's basically when politicians use fancy words, within their speeches and stuff. So why do you guys think they use this?
I'm guilty of it.
Yeah.
I love words.
Yeah.
I love finding the exact words. Sometimes they're very complicated, but I love finding them.
But I think, when you're speaking to your class or however you're communicating, I think that's a selfish reason because you love the words, but your audience doesn't, or they might not know it. And that is, as we all know, the difference between Obama's speeches and Trump's. And when I don't watch Trump on TV, not because I will burst out into flames if I do, but I don't enjoy it. It's not entertaining. It's not intellectually stimulating. I really do just avoid it. But from what I've seen, obviously, because I'm not an idiot, very simple, very short. When you listen to Obama, it is more ethos and perspective. But I think that it depends on who your audience is.
Yeah.
If you're going to if you're a Fulbright scholar and you are writing your essay or you are presenting your thesis, don't. Or maybe do. It depends on what your thesis, depends on what the topic is, and it depends on your audience. Yeah. I think maybe in the science field, it's completely different because you cannot avoid using simple words. But, you're in the tech industry. So my third year of law school, I was writing for our tech journal. And one of the qualifications for your articles was you need to break it down for someone who doesn't know tech. And a lot of lawyers, they don't know tech. And so when you're explaining something like user interface or how does a bot work, like how does the simple coding work, you have to break it down and put it into simple words.
Yeah.
I mean, it is fun to use big words. It really is. And it's also beautiful because you learn all these new words and you're expanding your vocabulary. But if you're using it because you like it and your audience is kind of like scratching their heads, then it defeats the purpose of your speech or your writing.
I think that's a really good way of actually, a couple of the points before was not using less words again. So it's interesting. That's actually my favorite thing to do is to go talk to one of my engineers and they're explaining to me this algorithm connects this one and that thing and then this is, and then they've spoken an essay to me and I will summarize it in 2 sentences or so there's an art to that too. And I think that just because you're not using the big words doesn't mean you can't do it eloquently.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's pretty interesting because I don't know. I've heard this a lot and I've read this a lot, but most president's speeches and most political speeches and most things you'll read in a newspaper, even just articles, are written at the 7th or 8th grade level.
That's right.
Yes. But it wasn't always like that. Right. Abraham Lincoln's speech, I think, was written at a 11th, 12th grade level, and it's just been kind of getting lower. Yeah, not even degrading because you could still maintain an eloquence.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
But
yeah,
it's and I told my students this just this week. I said if you, and it goes back to the wordiness thing in a way, because if you can just say something very directly, just say that. You don't need crazy language. Just because I like it, right, doesn't necessarily mean I need to utilize it. But you need to understand your audience, and most of these politicians are speaking to people with not necessarily an intelligence level, a comprehension level around 7th to 8th grade on a cold hearing or a cold reading.
That's right.
Right? If we spend time and scrutinize a speech, we have all the time in the world, we can dissect it. But if you're hearing Trump speak for 15 minutes, you want it to be clear, concise, simple, or whoever, Obama, whatever, whoever it is.
See that we brought up a lot with Trump, and I'm assuming that we're all thinking that he doesn't use this thing, right? Pretentious diction, because he doesn't know very, big words.
Well, I wouldn't say that he doesn't know. I just think that
he knows
that's
the biggest words.
So I think actually
huge words.
No, but going off of that, I think he actually tries to do this. Of
course.
He literally tries to use big words, but he just doesn't know them, and he repeats
he uses
tremendous.
Tremendous. That's the one.
Tremendous is always oh my gosh.
But I think it just depends. He knows his audience, and
I think he's just stupid.
I mean, yes, I'm not disagreeing with that, but I do think that that's his audience. That's what his MO. That's what he's going for. and we're talking about conciseness. But to be honest, it's not only, who's your audience, but even for me, like, I would say I have a semi-high intellectual capability and understanding, but I don't have time when I'm listening to a speech. I don't want to hear big words. And there's some big words that I don't, why? Do I have to go to thesaurus.com? Like, what? I forget what that word means. Get it out, get it quick. But for example, if I'm watching like a Shakespearean play or,
or listening to like some new, like NPR thing.
Exactly, or NPR. But it does get frustrating sometimes when they're using really prestigious and pretentious words.
I think that's... I think it's used, context, time, and place, where they're doing it, like medium. You said. Yeah, the medium of it.
It's different to read something versus hear someone say it.
Yeah, that's true. And actually, I wanted to, because we're comparing Obama and Trump a lot. I think it was during the midterms, Obama was, giving speeches for Democrats, trying to make sure that Democrats get elected. And I noticed something in his speeches. They're very different than how he was as president. I mean, obviously, it's a different time. He's playing a different role.
Different speechwriter too, I'm sure.
Yeah, but I noticed that he's using almost, I don't want to say a Trump technique, but he is kind of dumbing things down. He is kind of trying to evoke an emotional response from his viewers rather, it's like kind of the flip side of Trump, because he was doing it to get people to come out to vote, to realize that, hey, this stuff isn't normal. We're in trouble. We need to like get our stuff together and make sure that we beat this. So I think it's interesting how he's, at least today, that kind of has flipped, because he's trying to appeal to a much more broader audience to get more people to come out and vote, whereas they wouldn't normally vote for Democrats because of the situation that we're in. Yeah.
Would you imagine, and this is like a general question, would you imagine, because you're saying he's trying to broaden the field of people coming out to vote, would you imagine there's like a racial thing too? And like this is like an infrastructural racial thing, like let's dumb it down for minorities so that they understand what's important and what's not.
I don't think
maybe
so.
this is a controversial question,
like
but would that be part of it?
I don't think you mean Obama dumbs it down for minorities?
Not consciously in a malicious way. I mean, you're saying he wants to broaden the the voter base, let's say, for the midterms to drum up stuff. And so he's obviously talking to a new voter base, new people that are like redefining this body politic, right? So is that baked in a racial, like, is there something racial baked into this?
I don't think it's racial, because I think that
or demographic based
because you're implying that if he is dumbing down the language, it's so that he can appeal to people who wouldn't normally understand English, right?
Not necessarily. Who wouldn't understand, who are of different levels of education.
Well, I mean, when you say minority, exactly when you're saying minorities, I think like, okay, well, why is he doing that for the minorities? Because all those minorities are probably going to vote for Democrats anyway, because Democrats
but not a lot of them come out to vote. That's the problem. Right?
That's true. Maybe to the call to action, the urgency of things.
Yeah.
That can be true. Yeah, because if you're a minority, you can rightly so feel threatened within this country now, depending on which state you live in.
So I'm saying, is it baked in? Is like the dumbing down baked into some racial quality? In this country, not inherently. I don't think this situation directly has to do with like a racial thing, but it's possible that happens.
I mean, I think that you've mentioned like speechwriters so many times, so they're always analyzing who am I trying to get this point across to, whether in this speech it's a different group than this speech, and they're adjusting language.
It's inherent,
agree with you,
right?
Yeah.
It's an inherent thing. Maybe it's not racial in the sense I see like someone of a certain color and I think they're dumb. That's not what I'm saying.
No,
it's just like it's a language game. You're playing a different language game.
It's matching the demographic to the language you're going to present, and I mean, marketing is the same thing. It's like they'll do tests on, should we make this red? Should we make this blue? And understanding, okay, the people who buy our product like this red color, we're going to use this more. So it's adjusting that for their political speeches.
Why are certain things marketed in impoverished neighborhoods, which are historically sometimes neighborhoods of color? Why are only certain things advertised there and in certain ways as opposed to in affluent white neighborhoods. You're not going to see a billboard for like KFC, let's say, or something like that. So I would imagine it's the same way for political speeches, that it's not that I'm saying it's a racial thing in the speech itself. I'm saying the system is baked in such a way that when you get the final cake, it comes out with a certain level of frosting for the people who are going to eat it. Like it's a certain kind of frosting that they're going to like than...
It's tailored.
Yeah.
But that would
No, catered.
That's what it,
Tailored would be clothes. We're talking about cakes here.
okay.
Catered.
But I mean, I don't see that as a bad thing.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
me neither.
you know, because if it goes over your head, then your product is lost, and if your product is a vote or an ideology, then you're not delivering the cake.
You're not marketing the same cake in LA that you are marketing in Minnesota.
Sure, yeah. I'm not saying it's a malicious thing. It was just
Yeah.
But I would not, as a last point on this, I wouldn't say that it's a race thing, because you can have a, you know, very smart, let's say Russian immigrant who is now in the US, and his or her English may not be dominant, or a very smart Armenian in the US and their, you know, third language is English. It's not a race thing. It's not a ability to comprehend. It's a language thing. And that is, of course, yes, I will admit that's connected to, you know, your race potentially.
I mean,
it's
more
anyway.
on the communication end of language rather than on the...
Again, I want to make it clear, I'm saying nothing about someone's intelligence.
No, it's okay, don't worry. We're not. Yeah, we know.
We don't know. Just kidding.
All right, so let's move on to number six now, which is words with variable meanings. So basically, words that can mean many different things to many different people and perspectives. So in the article, he touches up on points made, like basically stuff that Orwell said, and I think he took an excerpt from Churchill. But something Orwell said is the word fascism has now no meaning except insofar as it signifies something not desirable. And in the case of a word like democracy, not only is there no agreed definition, but the attempt to make one is resisted from all sides.
Yeah.
It is almost universally felt that we call a country democratic, we are praising it, and consequently the defenders of every kind of regime claim that it is a democracy and fear that they might have to stop using the word if it were tied down to any one meaning. So we see that today, like the Russian Federation is, you know, on paper a democracy, but maybe in reality, you know, they don't follow through on the practices of accountability and transparency that are supposed to be integral to having a democracy. And like this was, so I don't know if you guys are familiar with like when Soviet Union was collapsing and, you know, Russia was transitioning and all of that, but basically in the 90s, Yeltsin, who was made president after the Soviet Union of Russia, Yeltsin was working with the West, and basically they said, you guys have to, you know, you guys need to do democracy because this like authoritarian type of government isn't working, it's not good, and all this stuff. So after a while, kind of going back and forth, the Russians kind of said, hey, we're gonna do democracy. You can't constantly be up in our business, but we're going to do it. Like this is, our nation is trying to transition and move on. So that was like 20 years ago when like Putin first came to power, and they've basically like changed
20 years later.
I mean that's what this is like kind of talking about, because Putin can come out and say we are a more extreme example, Kim Jong-un and North Korea. Right. North Korea's official name is the Democratic Republic of Korea. It's not democratic or Republican, you know, like it's very like tyrannical. And it can also be shown with, you know, whenever they talk about like socialism, like in the US when we talk about socialism
or communism, man.
I mean, when they say like, it's going to be like a socialist government. Okay. So whenever they say that in the media or politicians, when they say that in America, that context is like, okay, most people, they're supposed to give the emotion that like, oh, this is scary, this is fearful, this is bad, it's going to be destructive. But, you know, if you look at more some of like, you know, maybe some more Western European countries, if they talk about socialism, they could be, when they hear the same thing, they'll be like, oh no, it'll be like socialism. You're like, oh, so healthcare and, you know, good infrastructure, good education, like, you know, so So essentially, words that have a definition can have multiple meanings within the context of politics because of the perspective applied to things.
So I was going to say, I haven't used these words since like third grade, so you might need to correct me on this, but I think it sounds like a differentiation of connotation and denotation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe at a more emotional level, right? I mean, connotation is the meaning. I'm looking at you directly, John, because English. Connotation, right, is the like general sense, and denotation is the actual definition.
Yeah. So connotation is what does this connote, like in kind of the colloquial way that we're just talking about, like what does fascism mean to you, kind of thing. Denote is actually using some kind of raw, tangible fact to
a Google
denote.
definition. Yeah.
Sure.
A little bit more. Yeah. But yes, I do believe it's that kind of dichotomy at play for sure.
Definitely. So, and I mean, it can be even more, things like human rights, like a term like human rights can mean different things within the concept, like political concept, because, someone here.
I can bring up the perfect example right now with the New Zealand Christchurch shooting.
Yeah.
She literally said, the Prime Minister, or I don't know if she's the Prime Minister,
PM, yeah.
Ardern, yeah. She literally said that owning a gun is a privilege, not a right. She said that.
Yep.
That is a far cry from how we interact with the Second Amendment here in the U.S., right? So it's almost the first time I've actually ever heard that distinction used in regards to owning a firearm and certain kinds of firearms, I guess. Yeah. So that's a perfect example of how the instance you brought up of human rights, how does that function, right? What's a right in one country or one context might be different from the rights in another country or context. The right of a North Korean is very different from the right as an American. And all of these are fabricated systems. So like how can you boil it down?
We like to hope that there is like a universal, like basic inalienable rights that we all kind of agree on, that like, is in the foundations and the articles in like the UN, like the charters of the UN. But at the same time, like, maybe the right to having food and water is not a human right in one country versus another country, so so when politicians use these words to have multiple meanings, it's done, I think, purposefully so that they can evoke a specific emotional response from someone, but not necessarily responsibly using that word.
Or it's just like a, two birds with one stone type thing, because if they say human rights and us four interpret it in different ways, it might be more similar than, compared to four other people in a different country, but they get all of us in one speech, and I think that's an effective tool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's also a difference between like words you use versus the time you use it. So like specifically like feminism used to be a bad word. You would categorize people that
radical feminists,
feminazis,
man haters,
like
and
that.
like so now we're in a time and a place where that definition has changed. A lot of what people associate it with is completely different now. It's like way more mainstream. It's used not in a negative way anymore. I guess that also depends on where you live.
Yeah.
So here in California, at least that is what we feel here. I still don't know what it would be somewhere else in the country or the world, but but it does also time matters too.
Yeah. You guys watch BoJack?
Yo, I love that show.
He wears that shirt or the hat or something, feminist AF, like feminist as fuck. I that's what I thought of immediately. I'm like, the perception has changed like radically.
It has, no, because I mean, going on like a little diverging here with feminism, but like I think because more and more information has come out and people have been able to communicate a lot more easily and share this information, that's what breaks down these like myths about these kinds of things. And we can also see it on like the flip side too, like what was it, a couple of weeks ago, was it Steve King, a Republican representative, at one point he was saying like, oh, when did the term white supremacist become something bad and negative? It's like, are you kidding me? You didn't always associate white supremacy with like fascism, Nazism, racism.
Bro, there's bad people on both sides, Sean. Please.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But like, But like that clearly carries like multiple meanings for some people on depending on what side you're on.
Well, I mean, one chant, we were talking about chants and, cliches, but it's chanting USA. And the most amazing experience that I had is when you are watching the Olympics, or I'm not going to say the X Games, when you're watching the Olympics, and you might internally, or maybe if you're, lucky enough to be watching it live, you are chanting America or USA, USA. You take that chant, you put it inside Congress, or you put it at a rally, and it has a completely different meaning.
Oh, yeah.
Totally.
The patriotism becomes nationalism.
Right. And I remember right when the freshman class was being sworn in, right, when they were chanting USA, and the left was kind of like, wait, why is our newly elected left-wing politicians, why are they chanting USA? And I think some of them came out and said, we understand the past few years it's been associated with like a racist chant or a white supremacist chant. That shouldn't be the case. Like patriotism, chanting USA should not be
and you could take
polarizing
it
issue.
way.
It shouldn't be. Yeah. That's really good. It's like redefining what it means to be.
But even
redefining
visually,
patriotism.
when you see crowds at sporting events, chanting America or chanting USA, we're like, yeah, of course, America. We're gonna beat, the French in soccer. Yeah. But which will never happen. But
it's like it's like a kind of a competitive, no negative connotation, right? It's like a good.
But the second we see different visualization on TV and who's uttering it and where it is it in Charlottesville? Is it in Congress? Who's uttering it? Then you're just like, whoa.
Context matters. Yeah, definitely.
I'm just gonna plug Hulu has live sports.
We were talking about esports earlier, right? They do that a lot in esports. Whenever
they chant USA.
Whenever an American team is playing like Dota 2 or League of Legends or something like that. And I know Emmy knows this too because he's watched these big things alongside me. And they will literally, when the team is doing well, start chanting USA. But here's the interesting thing is that in esports, at least, you don't necessarily need to be from the USA or from North America at all to be on the USA team. So actually, the USA team is just filled with different immigrants and different cultures, like citizens of different countries and stuff like that. But it's just becomes synonymous with like, this is our team geographically. And so we're going to chant for them with USA. Yeah.
Well, that's the interesting thing because that is... the two perspectives on when you chant USA, because when you chant USA, bottom line is like, no matter what your perspective is, you're doing it for, the patriotism, the pride, you're cheering, you want your team to win.
Your team.
But how you identify to that team is the difference, because you just set a perfect example. People identify because they live there. Immigrants, they're from different backgrounds, but because they're a part of this melting pot of the U.S., they're cheering for the U.S. team. Meanwhile, you might see some, maybe like at a football game or something conservatives are more into. They're chanting USA. They're painting red, white, and blue on themselves, and it carries a different meaning for them versus for immigrant or diverse communities, or more diverse communities versus more homogeneous.
Totally,
ones.
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to add, like when I was studying feminist studies at UCLA, it was not a cool thing to study. Like it was not a common like thing you would study, and it was something people would be like, that's why. Like, do you hate men?
Like, you're studying feminism.
What job are you gonna get with
exactly that is the big one. But
male serial killer.
It's so different, and like the Beyonce effect is real. Like she made it okay and made it socially acceptable.
That's what it was. Like people didn't know enough about it, didn't know the details what it was, because people honestly thought that it was just women trying to take over the masculine patriarchal role and have like a matriarchy over like that's what people believe it is.
So the scary thing is when it happens on the flip side that you were talking about, where white supremacists want to redefine what that means. Is there a person that can do that?
In what way?
Is allowed to?
Is there gonna be an equivalent to Beyonce on the right?
Premise?
I mean,
Trump is kind of doing that.
What's his name too is like getting a lot of flack. Jordan Peterson. He gets a lot of flack for that as like a white. He's like a Canadian intellectual, I guess, and he gets a lot of flack for being like a symbol of white supremacy, even though his ideas themselves don't necessarily really involve that, but because he's like all about, like he's against social justice, like in a lot of ways and shapes, and so because of that, he's co-opted as a figure of like strong white supremacy. It becomes that. It's about the men's rights now, right? That's the whole quote unquote.
Kind of. I don't want to discuss it too much into detail because I do kind of want to move on. But what you're saying, like, that happens a lot with these like right wing politicians, and a lot of times they excuse themselves by being libertarians and claim that they're in the middle, but like you're not. Is that a lot of the arguments that they present is they're always talking about issues that, or talking. Like when you said social justice, right? That's like an issue left and right. They're always like, okay, the left is more for social justice, the right is against it. I feel like a lot of times,
that's a loosely defined term in a lot of ways as well.
Right. But I feel like a lot of times whenever you have a conversation about this and inherently might not be racist for the person talking against it, like saying that, oh, social justice warrior stuff or whatever is wrong. I'm not racist. I'm just saying, like, you know, from my perspective, like that's fine. But I think that what people don't realize is that is then lending legitimacy to the racists and their arguments, because they say, oh, look, we're not even racist, you're like, you know, we're right, and it's not even being racist. So but I don't want to go too much. Race is another topic and day and issue that, you know,
but it's all related.
It
all like connects, like in actually kind of a scary way sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely scary way. But let's move on to the last point that Orwell brought up, and that is oversimplification. So this is kind of like, you know, when politicians or anyone really glosses over terms or words or events or anything like that, try to oversimplify it to try to, you know, maybe ignore the specific implications or what, you know, the deeper meaning of what it holds. So I think a really good point that this article kind of brought up was when they were talking about how the military oversimplifies terms for their soldiers. So rather than the military saying that, hey, we need to go in there and kill this person, instead they say that, oh, we need to, you know, instead of human enemies being murdered, they are targets that need to be reduced. So like,
get this bogey or something. I don't know. Like
dehumanizing things.
Yeah, exactly. Dehumanization. You know, it says that, you know, they talk about destroying, engaging, dropping, bagging, but you don't hear the word killing. You know, it's you remove that from the person's mind so that it become whatever the task is becomes easier to swallow for them. So it's,
I mean, there's a difference between dehumanization and, you know, simplification, though. And I wonder if with like simplification, I mean, you said it and I immediately think the logistics of a political speech. You know, if it's on C-SPAN, it can go on forever. But if it's on, you know, prime time, you have 20 minutes, you got to get this out of the way. You can't dive into a lot of the language used. And also sometimes it's not a privilege as in white privilege or that sort of social privilege, but privileged information is confidential information.
Right.
How you're going to do it. Yeah.
No, as in I can't divulge certain information to explain something to you because it's confidential, legally or through whatever protective order you put in place. And I think that dehumanizing something is sugarcoating it, and simplification can be more of a logistical tactic as opposed to a malicious tactic.
Sure.
Right.
What would you guys say about, if we're like categorizing it, what would you guys say about like deflection in this kind of thing? For the example I'm thinking of is whenever there's like some kind of mass shooting, and oftentimes like certain politicians will come up and say, well, it's too early to politicize this. Like we don't want to make this a political thing. Like, you know, give everybody time to breathe, thoughts and prayers, etc. That's deflection, right? Can that be part of this categorization as well, or is that, do you think, a separate thing entirely?
I think what Shant was bringing up, and I mean, the points are yours, but it's more of a language type simplification, and I think deflection, of course, it uses language to do so, but it's more of a
different thing.
Yeah, I think simplification is literally by the words and the language and the letters that you're using.
Yeah. I mean, it's. I mean, the I think some. Yeah, I mean, definitely. It's a lot of it too is the, you know, you're trying. I think. Sorry, I'm kind of like going off here, but I think that some of the points, some of the reasons that they use this oversimplification is like, you know, trying to gloss over things like, oh, that matter that happened at, you know, this point or something. Like you're trying to oversimplify something that might be more complex and might show some sort of what's the word? Flaws or something bad
Nuances
that
or
happened.
something.
Yeah.
Actually, when you were saying that, it reminded me. I think I have a handle on this a little bit more. Is that one of the words I think that is used constantly, and it's an oversimplifying word, is when we call something a crisis. Would you guys think that would fit into this kind of thing? Like when we say the opioid crisis, the immigrant crisis, the gun crisis, or like all these kinds of things. When we call it a crisis, we're actually negating the nuances and like kind of the different angles that this can take, right? What exactly makes this opioid crisis a crisis? Like, what are the factors involved, right? Who's involved? Where's the money going? What drugs are in this kind of thing? And obviously you can dig in and figure that out, but someone in a 20-minute speech or a 15-minute speech on primetime is not going to be doing that. They're going to call it we need to deal with the opioid crisis, or there's an immigrant crisis that's leading to this invasion of caravans coming our way, right? And it's just like a very quick, simple thing that we repeat over and over again to keep the climax going, right? Of like what we're saying. So I guess that would be one way I understand it.
Yeah, but there's a time and place for it. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that in the speeches. And if you're like genuinely interested in these factors that clearly exist behind the oversimplification, you have your thesis, you have your reports that come out from the agencies that you can read, but who has time to read a 600-page report? Unless it's your life, that's your job, and even if it is, you don't have time to read 600 pages. Give me the 2-page summary.
Yeah,
and I think that kind of goes into some of what I wanted to talk about. Okay, sorry, you just. Kind of like message me. We're an hour in, but sorry. Yeah, what we sorry guys, I kind of just lost my train of thought there.
The conversation's moving.
Yeah. Where what was that last point you made?
Me?
That oversimplification is not necessarily bad, right? That was
that especially for me, and I'm assuming for superiors and bosses and people who have less time. Simplification is necessary. If I'm handling 10 cases, I don't want to read. I don't have time.
Sure.
And this is like also a lot of in regards to how President Trump and then prior presidents received their memos in the day.
Yep.
Like Trump wants it one page, right? This is what's reported anyway. He wants it one page. His name should be mentioned often in it to keep his attention, et cetera, right? Whatever you believe about that. But then people refer to that kind of thing, not in a bad way, but just saying different presidents have different styles.
Right,
Obama was a big reader. He would actually prefer long, detailed memos, and he would read them late into the night, like even not sleeping to do so. It really just depends. Like some people you're right, will not have the time, and it's not necessarily a bad thing whatsoever.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
I was speaking about this with some colleagues, and it's amazing how partners, they don't dive into the issues like the lower associates do in firms, right? We're the ones going through these transcripts, we're reading it, and you develop a connection with the case if it's not horrible and boring. But the partner will take, and I'm assuming, will take way less time, and then they kill it in trial. And you're just like, how did you do that? You didn't spend 2 months or 600 hours learning about this case, reading about the case law. You don't have that context, but that is what a skilled partner does, is they don't need that context. They get it. They show up to trial and they, may or may not kill it, but they still perform way better than we would, having spent so much time diving in the details. And I'm not saying Trump is that successful, but maybe that's his goal. Is like, take this one page and that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to work off of this 1-page summary.
And let other people handle like the thing.
Exactly.
Like, okay, Mark Pompeo can deal with this. Jim Mattis
just
can deal with this one.
delegating it.
Yeah, he just delegates. Yeah.
Well, so that also depends on like the team you have working for you, and you're trusting that they are legit, know what they're doing in order for that to be successful, because it can also be the flip,
That's why that anonymous op-ed in the New York Times, the one where like they were revealing like there are actually adults in the room, we take things off of Trump's table. That's why it was actually such a big deal, because all of a sudden you wonder, well, are the people he's delegating like the right kind of people? And maybe depending on your political leanings, you think yes they are because they're removing things from him, or depending on your political leanings you say no they're not, he needs people like who agree with his kind of like flavor of administration.
We had talked about this yesterday, of also selective with what you're communicating to not make something sound as urgent as it is too.
We
were talking about how you get on the news they'll cover and say, oh, there's like water on Mars and that, you know, there could be life out there, instead of being like, the aliens are right there, they are next door, you know? So it would invoke some type of response from people that you don't want. You don't want like mayhem in the streets. So
yeah, and actually I wanted to dive into another point I wanted to talk about as far as like the media and all of that. But before we do, let's take a brief little intermission, and then we can dive back into the last portion of this.
Cool.